Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books, and welcome to this recent reads video that will be all about short books because that's what I've read recently. So I'm just going to present them in the order I read them. Some of them are not translated in English, but I'm going to present them anyway. So the first one that I read in French, but it exists in English. In English, it is Thirst, and the author is Amélie Nothomb. I have a bit of a weird relation with that author. I read two of her books. So she wrote tons. I think she has written like 20 or 25 books. And I've read now three of them. The first one, I thought it was okay. I think the title in English is Awe and Trembling. I'll just write it down. If that's not it, I'll write it down here. And the second one that I read was Pétronille. And that one was just boring and insignificant, and it almost made me give up on that author. So I decided to give her a third chance, and with that third chance, the author won herself a fourth chance because I did not hate the book, which is already not bad, because I chose it blindly because there was no summary at the back. I just chose it blindly, and it turns out that it's one of my biggest pet peeves. That is a historical novel told in the first person point of view, from the point of view of a famous person. And in this case, it is Jesus who is speaking. So that's one of my biggest pet peeves because in particular, Jesus, really, who do you think you are to speak in the name of Jesus? And I'm not even somebody who believes much, so it's, I don't know, there was something in the book that I thought was a bit arrogant. Really, that's what I thought. Who do you think you are to write in the name of Jesus? Now, of course, she doesn't pretend to be the real Jesus. She knows perfectly well that this Jesus is a fictional character. But nevertheless, it's one of my biggest pet peeves. So I thought it was okay. I was happy that it was not autofiction, because I thought that Nothomb only wrote autofiction, and obviously this makes it not the case. So I'm going to give her another try. Again, perhaps something else. Not now. I'll wait a couple of years, but yeah, if you like historical fiction that sort of rewrites history, this one might be up your alley more than it was up my alley. And then I read this one. I don't think it's translated in English. This is nonfiction. It's very short. It's 92 pages, and the previous one in French, it was 150 pages, but I think the Europe edition is just 92 pages too. So this tiny book, it was published just after the Cathedral Notre-Dame de Paris burned in 2000, when was it, in 2018? 2019 that it burned. So it's a collection of 3 texts plus a 2-page introduction by Sylvain Tesson, who is a travel writer who is very popular in France. I had never read him before, and 2 of these texts had been published previously. So there's just the introduction and the last one, which is a reaction to the burning of Notre-Dame, that are new. The first one of the 3 that is not the introduction. I don't count the introduction. So the 3 texts that are about the cathedral. The first one I thought was just so dude bro-ish. It's the story of him and his friends. They are, I don't know how it's called, urban climbing, something like that. They climb on top of buildings without ropes, without anything. They just climb on top of buildings, and of course that's illegal. And the thing that made me say that is very dude bro-ish, first, the activity in and of itself is a little bit dude bro-ish, but also at some point he says, yes, we do this at night, but it's not because we don't respect order or authorities, it's because we do respect order and authorities. And I thought, bullshit. You do this at night because you don't want to get caught, because you're going to go to jail, because it's illegal. So yeah. And then in the second essay, he talks about how after an accident, because one time he was drunk and he fell out of a window and broke basically every bone in his body, he had to do a lot of physiotherapy, and he lives near the cathedral. So instead of going to the gym or going to other places, he got a pass, and every day he would go and climb in the towers and and because this place here is normally open to tourists. So he went there and he just climbed up, and that was his exercise. So that's the second one. And the third essay is about the night that the cathedral burned. But the first one was really dude bro, so I'm not sure I want to read something else by him. Maybe I'll give him another try, but maybe not. My third book was was just so wonderful. It was the best. 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff. So this woman, Helen Hanff, was a writer, and she was living in New York, and she wanted to buy books for cheap. And she saw a publicity, an ad in the Saturday Review of Literature for a bookshop in London. And she wrote to the bookshop, I am looking for this sort of book. And the bookshop answered, well, here. And then a correspondence started between Helen Hanff and the people at the bookstore. And it's just so charming. It goes on for 20 years. And Helen Hanff, being a poor writer, she doesn't have the money to cross the ocean and go and meet her friends. It's so wonderful. So this is a library copy. What did I do? I went to the bookstore and I bought my own copy because I'll want to reread it. I know that. This is so delightful. It's just wonderful, and it's already a favorite of mine. Even though I've read it just once and I've read it just a few days ago, it's already a lifetime favorite of mine, I'm pretty sure. I'm going to reread this over and over again. And I'm going to pay more attention to the books that she buys, because sometimes I did not really pay attention to whatever she was buying, but the next time I'm going to pay attention to that and see. For most of it, it's book I wouldn't buy. Once she mentions Jane Austen, but most of the books are older writers. She mentioned a lot of classics and a lot of like real classics from ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and various editions of English writers that I'm not aware of. But anyway, it was just delightful. I highly recommend it. And next, I continued with some more nonfiction, because for me, fall is really about nonfiction. I love reading nonfiction. So I read a couple of books, they sort of go together. So this is, neither of them are translated in English. So this is Retour à Birkenau, so going back to Birkenau, I guess. And this one is A Happy Life. So both by the same author, which is Ginette Kolenka. This woman was arrested when she was 19 years old with her father, her brother, and her nephew, and they were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And she's the only one who came back. And she was from a family of 7 children. There were 6 daughters and one boy, who was the last one, and he didn't survive. Of the 6 sisters, only 2 were deported. The other 4 apparently managed to survive the war with false papers. They managed to hide, and the eldest died. She was the mother of the nephew who also died, who was arrested with her, and she was the only one who survived the camps. And it's a very moving story. So this is the story in the camp and how she survived, and this is the story of her life before and after. To give us a bit of context. And for this book, when this book was published in 2019, is that it? No, it's more recent than that. The first one was from 2019. So this one is from 2019. This one is from 2023. It's from this year. And she is 98 years old. And she is still living in the same apartment where she was living at the beginning of the war. She lived there basically all of her life since she was 10 years old, except for the 3 years of the war. At first, they moved to south of France, to Avignon, and that is where she was arrested. And then she was deported to Poland. That was in 1943. So she stayed there from 1943 to 1944, or from 44 to 45. She stayed there for about a year, which is quite a long time to survive, and she did. And a person that we meet is, at some point, she received a gift from another inmate at Birkenau, another French woman who had been deported. Her name was Simone. For some reason, the capo liked her and had given her a dress, and Simone decided to give the dress to Ginette. and that woman became the minister Simone Veil. She was a very important minister in France after the war, long after, well, not long after the war, but in the 60s and 70s, and she became an important person. And she met her in Birkenau, and I think they kept meeting. So a group of French exiles, I don't know if I can call them that, a group of French deported women, they kept meeting once a month in Paris. And yeah, it's a lovely story. And then I moved on to some poetry because sometimes I needed something a bit lighter. So this is Pure Pagan, 7 centuries of Greek poems and fragments, and it is selected and translated by Burton Raffel, I guess. And they are very short poems like this. Some of them could have been written this year. Let me find the one by the poet Alkaios. Alkaios, I'm going to look at the back, there's a bit of a biography of each. So Alkaios was born at about in the year 620 BC. So that is 27 centuries ago. A resident of Mytilene on the island of Lesbos. And he fought unsuccessfully against the tyrant then ruling the island and fled to Egypt. So that's a bit of his life. And the poem I want to read is Politics. Just think, does it remind you of anyone? He wants power. He has power. He wants more. And his country will break in his hands, is breaking now. So of course you could put many names on that, pretty much any dictator from ancient Greece all the way to modern United States. So it was really fun to read, and I like many of the poems. This was a fun read. And then another nonfiction, the last nonfiction, 7 Brief Lessons on Physics by Carlo Rovelli, translated from Italian. So the lessons are really very, very brief. It's 80 pages. About 80 pages, and they are small pages. I don't know if it's visible on the screen, but this is the size of a mass market paperback. Well, it's in hardcover, but it's basically the size of a mass market paperback. But it doesn't have the density of a mass market paperback, so it reads very quickly. And there's a lesson on relativity, on quantum physics, a lesson on thermodynamics. Do they have names? Yes, they do have names. So the most beautiful of theories, that's relativity. Quanta, the architecture of the cosmos, particles, grains of space, probability, time, and the heat of black holes and ourselves. So it's a really, really brief, very, very brief overview of the modern principles of physics. So from the small to the big. And it's very entertaining. Of course, it doesn't go in depth, obviously, because the book is teeny tiny, but still, you can learn something in the book, or it can remind you of some things you may have forgotten. In my case, yeah, I had forgotten a few things. And then the last shorty book that I read, it was an ebook, and it was How to Catch a Wild Viscount by Tessa Dare. So this is obviously a romance. This is the first book that she published. It's about 82 pages, so it's barely a novella. It was entertaining. However, for me, it's not enough to create a lot of heat between the characters. We don't get to know there's not a lot of seduction going on in just 82 pages. Because it's a debut, I think it's really good. So I'm going to read more Tessa Dare. I've never read any Tessa Dare except this. So she's a very popular romance author. So this was my introduction to her, and I kind of liked it. So that's it for the shorty books. Now for the rest of the month, I don't know if I'm going to keep with shorty books because now I've started some bigger books. Because September is also Shaketember. So I am currently reading Romeo and Juliet in this big Oxford edition. I did not dwell a lot on on all of the essays at the beginning. I'm really just reading the text, and there's a lot of footnotes. That's the thing. For every page, there's about half a page of footnotes, and sometimes even more. So it takes more more time to read the footnotes than to read the text itself. And I'm also reading something Shakespeare adjacent. So this is Death by Shakespeare. Shakespeare, Stabbings and Broken Hearts. And it's about how the characters in Shakespeare plays die and how that relates to the life or death in 16th and 17th century England. So how it relates to the time of Shakespeare. So it's really about death. It's all about death. And it is, so sometimes the trigger is what we find in the play, and sometimes the trigger is what we find in real life. So how did people die at the end of the 16th century? Well, a lot of people died from, I don't know, disease. And then, so there's a chapter on disease. So far, I've read a chapter, the first chapter is on the author himself. So a mini biography of Shakespeare, and then the theater at the time of Shakespeare. And a thing that the author mentioned, so at the theater, there was not a lot of props, but given that at the time executions were public, the population was used to see a lot of gore. So if there was to be a murder scene on the stage, people would expect to see blood. And that is something that the writers had to take into account. And she mentions that in Julius Caesar, at some point, so Julius Caesar is stabbed like 10 times, 12 times from very up close. So that means that the perpetrators will have blood on their hands. And then at some point, Mark Antony comes and shakes the hand of the perpetrators. So, I'm with you, I'm with you. And so he will also have blood on his hands. However, later they come back, but they don't have blood on their hands. So in Julius Caesar, Shakespeare allowed much less time for the actors to clean up. So there had to be time to allow for the cleanup. Brutus has a 43-line opportunity to wash the blood from his hands and arms, while Antony mourns over Caesar's body and discusses plans with his servant. Anthony has 34 lines to do the same thing, while Brutus addresses the crowd in Caesar's funeral oration. The pace of the play isn't held up, but there's still just enough time for the actors to wash off the blood, an example of Shakespeare's mastery of stagecraft. That's something I had never thought about, that the type of constraint that Shakespeare had to take into account, the change of costumes, of course, but also the cleaning up of blood. That was probably real blood, according to her. It could have been wine mixed with something else, but it probably was too liquid, wouldn't stick. So to have something stick, they probably went to the butcher places and asked for buckets of blood. And they would just use blood. So then there's a chapter on doctors and how efficient or inefficient they were. A chapter on executions, so sort of murders, but ordered by the officials after a trial, or sometimes not after a trial. And now I am in the middle of the chapter on murders. So there's a lot of murders in Shakespeare. So I'm going to learn all about how people die. And at the end of the book, there's a table with for each play how the characters die. So so obviously it's full of spoilers. So in King Lear we have a person who is stabbed, one who is slain, another one slain, one who dies of joy, one who is poisoned, one who stabs herself, one who is slain, one who is killed, and one who dies of grief. So if you just read the middle column, that's stabbed, slain, joy, poisoned, stabs herself, slain, killed, grief. So, yeah, in Titus Andronicus, slain, that's for 21 people. Dismembered, stabbed, beheaded, stabbed, throat cut, stabbed, buried chest deep and starved, hanged. So a lot of people die in Titus Andronicus. So that's an entertaining way, if a bit gruesome, I have to say. So some depictions are rather gruesome and macabre, but I don't care. It's entertaining. So that's what I'm reading currently. And as I said, I think a bit earlier, for me, autumn is nonfiction. So I'm probably going to focus a lot on nonfiction in the coming videos. So, in my coming readings and by consequence in my coming videos, even though I don't plan my videos ahead, so I don't know what my next video is going to be about. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine!